Welcome to part 1 of the bouncing ball tutorial. Let's get started right away. So make sure you have your project window set up. This is done in part 1 of the introduction series. If you haven't, let's just quickly create a new project. So File, Project Window. You can see that my current project is the bouncing ball. If you don't have bouncing ball as your current project, create a new project and call it bouncing ball. So I'm going to call this bouncing ball 2 because I already created one before, just for the sake of the tutorial. And we want to put this in the desktop, in the My folder, your name, and pretend bouncing underscore ball is not here. So I'm just putting it here, select, and then accept. And before we start any work, let's just save. You can either click on the floppy disk button here, which is a save shortcut, or you can also go to File, Save Scene As. They basically do the same thing. I'm making sure that this is being saved in the right spot. So Maya, your name, bouncing ball, and then scenes. So it should be in the scenes folder. Okay, just give it a name here, and then a number as well, bouncing ball underscore 01. All right, let's get started with adding in some geometry. So I'm going to the poly modeling shelf and clicking on the plane. Let's scale this up using our scale tool. So press R to use the scale tool and scale it up from the center. Once that's done, let's add a sphere. That's the first object in the poly modeling shelf. Now you can see that the sphere is kind of intersecting through the plane, which we don't want. So all I have to do is press the W key, and I'm actually going to the side view to see this better. And I know that it's being cut in half. It's kind of hard to see, but there are two darker lines here, and that represents the center of the grid. And I know that my plane is lying on the center of the grid, so if I just click and drag a box here, this green line represents the plane, and my sphere is, half of my sphere is underneath the plane. So I just have to select this and bring it up a bit so that it's actually sitting on top of the plane. So if I click and drag a selection area, you can see that both the sphere and the plane are flush. They're lined up properly. The next step is to make sure that our pivot is positioned correctly. Right now it's in the center of the ball, but I actually want to make it so that this gimbal is at the bottom of the ball. So this is helpful when we're stretching and squashing the ball. So if I try squashing it right now, you can see that the bottom of the ball starts to rise up, which we don't want. We want the bottom of the ball to remain stationary because the ball is pressing against the ground, and the bottom of the ball should not be going anywhere. So to do this, I'm holding the D key, D for dinosaur, holding it, and I'm clicking and dragging down here from the up arrow, and I'm placing it right here where the ball meets the plane. Okay, so you're looking for these crosshairs, right? The circle here with the blue and green crosses. Basically this whole gimbal, the center of that gimbal, there's a small yellow dot. That yellow dot should be in the center here. Once you're done, you can let go of D. Last step is to make sure that this is the new origin for our ball. So right now in the channel box, we can see that we've moved the ball a little bit in the y-axis. I want this to be the origin, the new origin for the ball, which means when the ball is at this state, all these values should be 0. But if I press 0 now, the ball goes back to being under the plane. So I'm going to undo that. And instead, we want to click this button here. It's called Freeze Transformations.
It's frickin' freezing in here, Mr. Bigglesworth.
So make sure your ball is selected, and then click on Freeze Transformations, and then have a look at the Translate Y value here. So you can see that Translate Y is now 0, but the ball didn't change. So the ball remains where it is, and now this acts as kind of a new origin for the ball. And this will help us when we're actually animating. There's just a couple more things to set up here. I'm going to the custom shelf up here, and your shelf is going to be empty for the most part if you haven't yet added anything in here. So just ignore these symbols here. What we're going to do is actually add our own custom button for bringing up the graph editor in Maya. Now, one thing that we're going to be using a lot is the graph editor, and that can be found up here in Windows, Animation Editors, and Graph Editor. I'm going to close this for now, Now, since we're going to be using this a lot, it's kind of annoying to go up here every time and click on these menus. So what you can do is actually create a shortcut button that lives in the shelf. And to do that, we just have to go again one more time to Windows, Animation Editors, and before I click on Graph Editor, I'm going to hold down Command and Shift. Okay, that's really important. Make sure you're holding these two keys down, Command and Shift, and then click on Graph Editor. Command Shift, click on the Graph Editor while you're holding down those two keys, and then look what happens in the shelf. You can see that it's added in a shortcut. If you're using a newer version of Maya, you might see a different icon here, but it's basically the same thing. So now if I click on this icon here, it opens up the graph editor, so it speeds up my workflow. Make sure that our auto key is turned on. So the auto key button is down here, right beside our animation preferences. We want this to be on all the time. Right now it's off. You'll know it's on if it's red, if it's highlighted in red. So basically what this does is every time I move an object that is being animated, the auto key will automagically set a keyframe. So I don't have to keep manually pressing S to set a keyframe every time. Last thing we're going to do here in part 1 is have a look down here at the timeline. So right now in my scene I have 120 frames. I'm viewing 120 frames, but overall I have 200 frames. So this is the end time of the animation. As you can see, I'm hovering the mouse over, and the end time of my animation is 200 frames. This box specifies the end time of the playback range. So whenever I click play, it's only going to play back frames 1 to 120, even though my animation is 200 frames. So basically, we just want both of these numbers to be 24 right now. So I'm going to type in 24 and press enter. So now we have frames 1 all the way to 24. And if I click play, I'm not going to see anything because we don't have any animation. So the ball's going to touch the ground at frame 12. So that's sort of the midway point of our animation. We have to press S first to set a keyframe. So go to frame 12, press S, and you can see here on the side that all our values have changed to red. Okay, I'll do that one more time. So have a look here at the channel box. Everything here is gray. Nothing is being animated. Also in the timeline, it looks kind of blank. And we'll know that the object is being animated if these values turn from gray to red. Okay, so I'm going to press S and then have a look. These values are now red, and in our timeline, there's kind of a red pinstripe, which means we have a keyframe there. Frame 1, the ball is going to be off the ground. And you can type in any number you like. I'm going to type in 10 up here in the y-axis and press enter. Just zoom out a bit so we can see it. And it's going to be in the same position on frame 24. So frame 24, it's also going to be 10 units up in the y-axis. Okay, so we've just set 3 keyframes, one on frame 1, frame 12, and frame 24. So now if I play my animation by clicking the play button down here, we can see the ball moving, although it's not very natural. So we're going to fix this in part 2.